We've talked a lot about alcoholism on this channel. We have talked a lot about drug addiction on this channel. We have talked a lot about addictive behaviors on this channel. We have not talked a lot about sex and love addiction. How are they related to drugs and alcohol? How are they different? And has there been a breakthrough in treatment? Let's get into it.
I'm JT. I'm in my mid-30s, have a 10-year media career, and nearly a decade of sobriety. So how did another middle-class kid turn into a blackout drunk and a heroin junkie? More importantly, how did it change, and where do we go from here? This is my story.
Our topic today references an article in SciTech Daily based on some research. So let's get into this. Men with hypersexual disorder may have higher levels of oxytocin in their blood than men without the disorder, according to a small study published in the Endocrine Society's Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism. Goes on. Hypersexual disorder involves excessive, persistent sexual behaviors related to various mood states with an impulsivity component and experience loss of control. That all probably sounds familiar, even if you have just a little point of reference from, say, the media even, to sex addiction. Oxytocin is a hormone produced by the hypothalamus and secreted by the pituitary gland. It plays a key role in sexual behavior, and abnormal levels of the hormone may contribute to hypersexual disorder. Now, here's where we get into the new research. We discovered that men with compulsive sexual behavior disorder, CSBD, had higher oxytocin levels compared with healthy men. Cognitive behavioral therapy led to a reduction in both hypersexual behavior and oxytocin levels. So to me, this is really interesting stuff. I love when it seems like there may be new research or potential breakthroughs in different addiction treatments. And I will point out that, therapy can be a great, at least starting point for so many different issues, especially with mental, emotional, and compulsive health in a human. I'm a big fan of therapy. I'm a big fan of one-on-one therapy. I'm an even bigger fan of group therapy. The little club I'm in is really just kind of group therapy. That's what it is. So I think this research is fascinating. I would just stand to guess that whether these scientific details about the levels of oxytocin, whether those 10, 20 years down the road prove to be true and prove to be a breakthrough in studying sex addiction, I think that therapy is a great place to start for any addiction, a great component for treating any addiction. I wanted to use this as a jumping off point because this is actually something that I have some experience with. I have never been diagnosed with the compulsive sex disorder. You may have heard this sort of bandied about around, say, the Tiger Woods scandal, things like that. I think we've actually come pretty far in starting to understand it, but sex addiction still is one of those that I think is a little bit more taboo. It's a little bit more kind of chuckled at, laughed at, especially from men, than some of the other addictions and how far we've come with understanding and talking about addictions and mental health in society. What I have experience with is I do self-identify as a love and sex addict. Again, I haven't had any of the compulsive issues, or at least been diagnosed with them, but I did start to, in my first relationship after getting sober, start to notice a lot of my behaviors that had been present around drugs and alcohol in my active using became present in my relationship, sexually speaking. Now, we'll get back to this a little bit later, but I started to trace it back to see where this all started. I started to realize that these issues have been present in my life well before I got sober, and really dating back to my first relationships. Now, for me, the love and sex addiction part, again, it's not about the compulsivity. It's about the love being addiction, the romance being an addiction, the other person being a codependent relationship addiction. And I look back to even my very first relationship, serious relationship, I was 14 years old, probably too young to get into that serious of a relationship. It was only a little while later, 15 years old, that I lost my virginity to that person. But I look back and I think with hindsight and all this knowledge that I have from my own experience and kind of studying addictive behavior, and I go, wow, it was so present when I first got into a relationship so young, when really, as a young boy with a really bad head on his shoulders, I had everything going for me at 14 years old to not be in a relationship, to be playing the field and having fun with my friends. And so why was I so quick to hurry into getting into a relationship that young? And I think it was a lot of things. Some of the top of the list were I was seeking escape, right? And I was just starting to get into drugs at that time. I started using drugs and alcohol about 12, 13. It hadn't fully gotten out of control in any sort of way yet. So I was still, under my parents' household. And although I towed that line and jumped over that line better than a lot of other people my age, I was living like an adult really early and kind of pulling the wool over my parents' eyes. In some respects, they just kind of gave up. But so I couldn't go head first into drugs and alcohol really at 14 years old. So looking back, I didn't know I was doing it at the time, but I think I sought that relationship, that romance, that love at such a young age because I was looking to escape my own feelings. I was also looking to escape the chaos in my home. I wasn't feeling the peace that I think I needed at home. Again, didn't understand any of this at the time, but looking back, I start to understand it. The irony, of course, is I did not find that peace in this relationship. I was in love. I'm sure I was really happy and elated and joyful a lot of the time, but there was also a lot of pain. First off, I was 14 years old. I had no business being in a serious relationship. I couldn't even drive yet. My brain was like hardly developed. In fact, I was probably behind a lot of other people emotionally at that time. And so it was chaotic. And so now I know I was also subconsciously seeking what I thought was comfort, or what I thought was peace. But for me, comfortable was chaos, my household, my parents' relationship. And you know what? That's what I got. And really, all my relationships after that, my high school relationship, I don't know what I was seeking. My drug and alcohol use was really ramped up at that time. But in that case, I was with someone else who had an unhealthy relationship with drugs and alcohol. But what? I felt comfortable in that chaos, didn't I? It was a little bit different in my college relationship. In my college relationship, I sought out someone subconsciously that put up with my crap, that unfortunately let me walk all over them. And it was contributing, it was enabling my using and addiction in a big way. Still a lot of that same chaos. And then when I got sober, totally different ballgame. Like I was saying before, I started to notice some of those same issues that I had in drugs and alcohol appear in my relationship. And it was really mainly around sex. It was around the ebbs and flows of the relationship as well. I had a lot of issues with acceptance. I had a lot of issues with expectations and resentments in the relationship. My head was not on straight. I was still very insecure. I thought I had come so far. I was about 2 years sober when I got into my first sober relationship, and I thought I had come so far. I really hadn't. Those insecurities that I'd fought so hard to get away from in my early sobriety, they started coming up in new ways in that relationship. And the sex thing really became an issue because I did start to behave badly around sex, to make sex the anchor of that relationship. And like I said, I look back, and even in the moment, I knew I was behaving badly and I almost couldn't help it. It's like I talk about now with my temper, how I've come a really long way, but I still have to, when I see it coming on, if I do see it coming on, have to stand back, count to 10, count to 60 sometimes because I see that red coming on, and I have to remind myself that everything's going to be okay. And most likely the people that I'm interacting with that I could be about to totally ruin their day probably have nothing to do with the reason that I'm feeling that way. Well, I had a lot of those same issues around sex and relationship in my first sober relationship. And in that case, and here's where I ultimately came through, and it was because of recovery, and specifically recovery to drugs and alcohol. I was able to meet some other men and some professionals who had similar experience. And I realized for me, and again, this is just my experience with it. Again, I didn't have the serious compulsive issues. So I would ask you to seek out knowledge on someone who's had that experience on those details. But for me, what I realized is that I needed to be in a healthy relationship to engage in sexual activity. And even in the relationship, abstinence might be the right course of action. In fact, in that first relationship, there was a period of abstinence that was agreed upon by both of us. And that may sound absolutely crazy to you in the year 2022, that two people that not necessarily for religious reasons, I think there were some religious reasons on her part, but aside from religious reasons, why would two consenting adults, semi-normal consenting adults, want to do that? And there were reasons on both sides, but for me, it was because I had to learn how to be in a relationship without sex being the anchor of the relationship. And it is one of the most profound moments in my adult life. It's one of the most profound moments in my recovery to realize that those same issues I had with drugs and alcohol would certainly become a problem in a relationship or outside of a relationship when it comes to sex and sexual behavior and just romantic behavior in general. So it was a big breakthrough for me, and it was hard because I was still had the mindset of how I was when I was a teenager, how I was when I was in college. It wasn't as bad as back then. Back then I was just like gallivanting, like I was on the prowl. I'm not proud of the guy I was in a lot of respects back then. And while I thought I had matured in certain ways, I really hadn't, because sex was still so important to me. And I had a lot of guilt and shame around that. But what I learned was I have to be able to live with myself and respect myself and have security, and also respect the person or people that I'm potentially courting or being in a relationship with, to know them, to be able to love without sex being part of the equation. And it was such a huge breakthrough in my life. It brought me, I started to learn that I was seeking peace in recovery, right? Because I'd never had that before. Oh my goodness. I got so much peace once I accepted that sex did not have to be, and really for me couldn't be, a conquest. Could not be a conquest. I got so much peace in my life. It was a really, really profound thing for me, internally, externally. And so that relationship obviously didn't work out. This is a different relationship than the one I got out of a couple years ago. But what I will say is it has caused complications with relationships. I'm 30 something, I'm single, I do meet people, and yeah, I have desires. I have crazy desires. My blood, I am a red-blooded American male, and I still have all those feelings and all those thoughts, and I don't, like I said, have the extreme compulsions, but I'm a man. There's just certain biology going on with me, and I am very, very attracted to women. And I have no problem putting this information out there because I've learned and grown from it, and I've totally accepted who I am in this regard. It took a lot of work. It wasn't easy to come by. It didn't become. It wasn't always easy for me to get to this place where I committed to you, but I committed to you now. But where it causes complications, well, of course, you can imagine another consenting adult might think that my line of thinking and this behavior that I have to engage in to be healthy is crazy. Someone might be like, well, I don't want to be involved with someone who like has to be in a relationship to have sex. And even if they're in a relationship, may not be able to at that point. And I totally understand that. But I've come to a place where I either don't have to engage in that, or sometimes it's just best that I don't. I need not to be healthy. And this is one of those other things. This may provide some context to a whole year's worth of videos on this channel about who I am and why it's been hard for me to find the right person and why dating has been a struggle and all those sorts of things. But look, that's who I am, and that's how I've gotten to this point. And that's also why I have a certain level of acceptance about where I am socially and in relationships in my love life, because it's not just going to be anybody that I end up with. You're talking about a laundry list of things that someone is going to have to be okay with and accepting with. You got the drug and alcohol addiction, the sober lifestyle, the work addict stuff, and this on top of it as well that I'm now introducing to you, but has been part of my life for a long time. So I understand that it's not going to be the easiest thing in the world for me to find that person. I'm okay with that because you know what? This is what I got to do. This is how I got to live. Because right now, while there's things that I want in life, I want a relationship, I would like to start a family like yesterday, a long time ago. But I have peace and I have security and I have contentment right now. And I have for several years for the first time in my life. And that is number one to me. And I got to hold on to that because of all the other things that could happen in my life, good or bad, I've got this. And this is what I searched for and had needed my entire life. And if I'm going to be in a relationship, it's going to have to fall into place with all these other things. You know what? When I find the right person, I may have some things that I need to concede and come to grips with and understand for that to work. So that's my experience with love and sex addiction. And I'm kind of throwing a lot at you right now that you probably maybe didn't know about me. I've hinted at it a little bit here and there. But I think it's fantastic that there's some research on the matter. And again, if therapy has decreased these oxytocin levels in people who have the compulsive issues with sex addiction, men specifically, I think that's a great hint that there are so many other things in this life that therapy can at least be a great starting point for and possibly be a great answer for. Okay, let's get the mail. Mail today, in reference to us talking about rock bottom, this comes from our buddy Josh. And Josh says, agree 100%. For me, I had to lose everything I was trying to hold on to while fully active in my addiction. My whole family had to say, we love you, but we're going to love you from a distance. At that point, I was at the bottom. I was at the lowest point my life had ever been. I ended up flipping my 93 Grand Marquis onto the roof and back over on its wheels. Goodness. Luckily, all I had was bruised ribs and a small scratch on my hand. From there, I attribute my sobriety to daily action after next right step action. Much love. Thank you so much for commenting, Josh. I think you hear in that comment a lot of the things, not just that I talked about with Rock Bottom, but a lot of the things that I echo here on this channel week after week. And why is that? Well, because I am not special. My story is not unique. My story, there are similarities in everyone who has experienced this and come out on the other side. And you hear it right there with Josh. With Josh, it wasn't just that his whole family had to love him from a distance. It wasn't just that he had to flip his car. It was all of these things that mounted up that he finally realized, I got to take some action. And he probably didn't come by it easily. In fact, I put all the money I have in the world on it. He didn't come by it easily. But we hear these echoes in our stories over and over again, because at the end of the day, we're all the same. It doesn't matter what drug or what addiction we are coming from. Our behaviors, while the details may be a little bit different, the way we act out in these scenarios and how we get to the program is really all the same at the end of the day. So thank you so much, Josh. I did want to tack on one little thing because I'm just beaming about it. This weekend, I got to take part in a really cool event, the first really, I think, of its kind in the DFW Metroplex, that was all about healthy lifestyle, healthy living, healthy eating, exercise, mental health, emotional health. And I got to moderate some panels with some amazing experts. And what's really cool about it is, because of the pandemic, emceeing, hosting events on stage in front of audiences was a huge part of my career. I was doing it every single week for 12 years, and I hadn't done that. I hadn't been on a stage in front of a crowd with a microphone since before the pandemic started. And so I got to do that this weekend and do it talking about mental and emotional health and physical health, which is like everything in my world that I love, and I'm just so grateful for it. My cup was so filled getting to be part of this event, and I can't wait to do more. It's just such a great reminder, right, that the pandemic has taught us the things that we lose that we don't think of as essential, the things that we had lost. And I'm here in Texas, where we've basically been open for 2 years. And still, these events, all the things that come with them, and this one almost didn't happen because of the weather here in DFW, the crazy weather we've had. But I bring it up because it's such a great reminder. This thing, I knew that I loved being on stage and talking on the microphone, and I knew that I missed it, and I'd like to do it again, but I had forgotten how important it was to me feeling like me, because it had been so long. And now that I've done it again, I go, oh my gosh, I cannot go that long again without doing that. That was really important. I feel very at home. I feel very at peace when I get to do that, and that it was with this stuff that I care so much about. I just was beaming with fulfillment this week, and I'm so glad and hope I get to do more like that soon. And if you have something that you still haven't gotten to do since the pandemic that you're thinking about, and you've kind of been okay, but it's been a really long time since you did this thing, maybe it's painting, or maybe it's writing, or volunteering, stuff that just went by the wayside during the pandemic, I highly encourage you to find a way, if you can, to do that again as soon as possible, because I think you will have your cup filled as well. If you would like to be part of the mail, you can, of course, comment on this video or any video on the channel. I'm still seeing the updates every time we get a comment. You can also comment when I post this on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. All of the handles are below. If you'd like to have a private conversation, feel free to just DM me. I will not share that. It'll be private unless I think it's so good, I will ask you before talking about it on one of these videos. Any comment that comes on a public post is fair game. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time. Hey family, if you like what we're doing here and you want to see more, please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. Share it with someone who you think might benefit from watching this, and feel free to comment below. Love.